As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. Today we have a longtime returning guest. Jay Taylor from jtaylormedia.com is here with us again on Reluctant Preppers. Jay, we met you in person at the Liberty Mastermind Symposium in Austin, Texas, where you were one of the key speakers there, and glad to have you back again here with us on Reluctant Preppers.
No, good to be with you.
Now, I see it on your daily radio podcast that I get. I'm a subscriber to your email that you send out. You typically interview many guests from a variety of backgrounds, often having to do with sound money, the gold and precious metals mining sector. Also, you often have Daniel McAdams from the Ron Paul Institute on, other commentators on political and corporate and economic realities in our world around us. So we're glad to have you here with us because you bring such a broad perspective of commentary on what's really going on. And specifically because you are in media, I wanted to ask you and sort of put you on the hot seat on behalf of the peers across the broader mainstream media, if you could help us understand what's really going on in the area of truth and falsehood in the media. I know it's something that's of concern to you as well, because you spoke in your address at the Liberty Mastermind Symposium about ethics and morality and does it all really matter? And I just wanted to start from the basics, and I know that this may be pretty basic for everybody, but when I was a kid growing up, we had the city paper that hit our front step in the morning and the afternoon editions, black and white print, and I believed that, because of what I was told, that this is where you go if you want to find out what's going on in the world around you. And other than I was warned that the editorial page, you had to kind of keep a little bit of a jaundiced eye on because there'd be a lot of opinions expressed there by the editor and others, but that other than the editorial page and the comics page, you should pretty much figure that the rest of the thing was trustworthy. It was all in black and white and responsible journalism. And then also we had Walter Cronkite on the evening news, and he always ended his broadcast with, "And that's the way it is." And I figured, well, he knows what he's talking about. Obviously, he's got a mustache, so that I should trust this guy. He looks like my grandfather. And since then, we've just been, and now two generations down the road, grandfather, myself, and everything, I'm looking just with just unbelief at what passes for journalism these days, and it doesn't seem to be random. It doesn't seem to be just people indulging themselves in expressing their opinions, although that certainly is one thing that seems to be happening out there. But the reason for our channel is helping people be aware and prepared so that they can look after the vital interests of themselves and their families, no matter what may come. But how in the world can you be aware when the sources of information that are primarily available to you out there seem to be following a very skewed path from this dependable, reliable, trustworthy, high integrity, unbiased expectation that we were taught as young people? And what are you seeing mega trends in that? Is there not just a scatter, but a trajectory in that? And then secondly, what are the specific narratives that seem to be, because again, it doesn't seem random. It seems to be along certain lines. Certain things are deemed to be newsworthy or to be reported. Other things are not, and things are twisted. So if you could kind of give us your view from within the media, but certainly an alternative media provider, what you see going on in both in trends and narratives in the mainstream media. Sure.
No, I think it's certainly not random. It's certainly not accidental. I think one of the things you can do is follow the money, and you realize that the main media, whether you're talking about television or if you're talking about the internet, is to a very great extent, you have to look and see who owns that media. And then, and that explains a lot about what the narrative is, what what you're going to hear from the mainstream is not going to be contradictory to their interest, the interest of the advertisers, the interest of the equity owners, the companies that own the media. It was very interesting. I think it was, I can't remember exactly the senator and exactly the time, but it was back in the 1920s, I believe, or 1930s, when there was a senator that raised the issue on a speech on the floor of the Senate of a handful of a handful of very wealthy people getting control of the media. And I think they figured at that time there were about 12 to 18 major newspapers. If they could buy those newspapers up, they would then be able to control the little newspaper that you might have gotten at your doorstep there in Sandusky, Ohio, or wherever you were brought up as a child. The idea was the concentration of power and determining what is newsworthy and what isn't. If you could own those major newspapers, then you could control what people even know to be the news. And I think that's a big part of it, is just keeping what seems not newsworthy, or what some people deem not newsworthy, just keeping it out of the press. That's the first thing that is done. And I think, though, that has the concentration is much more finite. It's much smaller. The number of big players now that actually control the media, that control it through their ownership. If, for example, if I watch CNBC, I'm not going to see very many people go out there and talk about what is really going on in the financial markets if it's really dire. They're going to paint the best picture possible. And we see it, of course, from the government. Also, the information that is handed out from the government is very seldom ever questioned. It's never questioned. I mean, whatever the Bureau of Labor Statistics says, the mainstream media are going to say, yeah, that's got to be right. These are trustworthy people. And they don't even question the veracity of the information that's being put out. John Williams is an independent economist, Dartmouth-educated gentleman who has been for the longest time comparing, for example, inflation and employment statistics on a constant basis with what was done going back to the 1930s. And if we look at those comparisons, we're looking at unemployment levels that are at or close to, at least, those of the 1930s. And if we use the same metrics for measuring inflation as we used prior to Ronald Reagan, we would be looking at inflation rates that are bumping up against as high as double digit in recent times. And so, I think a lot of it can be explained, the lack of information that we get from the mainstream, simply by the owners of those companies making sure that their interests, as they see it, at least in the short term, are taken care of. Now, what we have going for us, of course, it's this program. It's what we try to do at J. Taylor Media and my show, Turning Hard Times into Good Times, and Zero Hedge, I might add, and lots of other people that you and I talk to are aware that what we're getting from the mainstream isn't all that truthful, and that there are some major issues that are being ignored. And I think that's our hope, is that truth-seeking people, are able and continue to be free to raise these issues. And certainly it is causing some trouble. It is causing some consternation among the mainstream. Certainly this political season has been an example of it, both on the left and on the right. And I think that's a good thing. However, unless people are really focused on the truth, it can also be a dangerous thing. And so I am somewhat troubled by what I'm seeing in the media. I think on both sides, in both parties, we're not, it's demagoguery. It's really, how do we stir up people? It's not about getting deeply into the truth, because I suspect that the American people don't want to work that hard, perhaps. So that's part of the blame too, I guess.
Now, of those, so you've described a mega trend of concentration and consolidation of media into fewer and fewer hands. So you have a concentration of power, if information is power.
Sure.
And therefore, also, because it's corporately owned, inherent conflict of interest risk of that. But what specific narratives do you see emerging that are the ones? I mean, we would recognize them probably instinctively once you describe them. But can you articulate what you think some of maybe pick 2 or 3 of the main narratives that are just basically the story of the year or story of the decade in what is being sanctioned as acceptable to talk about in news, and maybe a couple that are completely considered blacklisted or blackballed or unworthy of being admitted?
Sure, one that comes to mind right away, and I don't really know what the truth is on this, but for example, recently Donald Trump came out and talked about the Vince Foster alleged suicide. Well, that caused me to go and pick up a book that I have here from Pritchard's, the British author who wrote a book on the secrets of the Clintons. And Trump was absolutely right in questioning. It is wide open, but it was an issue that wasn't allowed to be expressed and was basically put out. I think the mainstream media didn't want to address it. It was too uncomfortable if there was something more than a suicide involved. But there is all manner of reasons to suspect that there might have been. I'm not saying that I believe there was, but looking at the issues that were raised, I think you can still go back to the Kennedy assassination, as far as I'm concerned. If you look at the questions that were raised about that, you can certainly go to the 9/11 events. I think those issues have not been resolved, and I think they've been to a great extent swept under the carpet. And we're not just supposed to talk about those things. We're not supposed to think about those things. I've had William Engdahl, a historian, Princeton-educated historian who now lives in Germany, a very independent thinker, and he's raising a lot of issues about these things. What's going on now with respect to the geopolitical things that we never hear anything about, the Petro-Dollar, for example, and how after Nixon took us off the gold standard in 1971, how we were able to have the dollar not only remain the leading currency, but by far the dominant currency in the world, simply by having arrangements with Saudi Arabia and the OPEC nations to mandate sale of oil be denominated in dollars, thus ensuring that there would be a bid under the dollar always. These are the kinds of issues that people don't know anything about. The Ukraine situation that took place here, the American people, by and large, aren't aware that George Soros and some of his non-government organizations were involved in fomenting the overthrow of an elected government, just as the CIA did back in 1953 in getting rid of Mossadegh, who was elected in Iran. In that case, so that British Petroleum could get their oil and start selling oil that they were producing from Iran after they were told to get out of the country by the elected government. Or in the Ukraine, where the Anglo-American Empire is pushing its limits and up against Russia now, basically, I think pushing Russia and China into an adversarial position. So I guess there's nothing new about that. Empires have always tried to expand and with the ultimate goal of taking over and ruling the world. Is certainly what the United States is doing, though that certainly isn't the way it's presented to us. It's presented to us in the propaganda we get every day as if we are, what was it? World War I was to make the world safe for democracy, right? So even though democracy was never to be in our Constitution, it was to be a republic, but nonetheless, somehow we've been sold the bill of goods that democracy is the ultimate goal of every government, and if we only have democracy, but then I guess that works as long as you can keep the people thinking the way you want them to think. As long as your propaganda machine, I looked at Edward Bernays, the brilliant propagandist who actually was used, his theories and tools were used by Hitler during World War II, and certainly are being used by every political party essentially that's worth their salt these days, and it's all about how can we get people to believe what we want them to believe. And so unless people are willing to do some real hard work and dig underneath the surface, I'm afraid unless they're willing to look at the objective truth and not the truth as they want to see it, then I think I think we're in trouble. It was Thomas Jefferson that talked about the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. Well, if people aren't willing to work hard, and I don't want to preach too much because I do enjoy watching a good basketball game in the evenings instead of doing some other things that might be more noble. So I guess if, as my mother told me years ago, if I point my finger at my brother Roger, I've got 3 of them coming back at myself. So I don't mean to be, I don't mean to be judgmental. I'm just looking at the human race and at a prosperous Western world that I think has become lazy and has become has an attitude now of entitlement that suggests that we should all have an easy life and that we have a right to whatever we want, and we're going to vote on those people that will give it to us. And so unless you have people that are willing to face the truth, then you're going to be in trouble, because ultimately the laws of nature prevail. And I think we're going to find that out big time in the world of economics and other areas.
Yeah, focusing. If we could zero in on that, if you could pick 1 or 2 stories that you think, if you could give us, what's the party line, what's the company line that we're being told incessantly on mainstream media, and what is the underlying reality that you believe exists that contrasts with that?
Sure. Well, in the economy, and economics is the world that I live in most, so I guess maybe I could talk about that. I think, we are told constantly by CNBC and Bloomberg and the other major media that things are pretty good, not as good as they should be. We need to work a little harder. Government needs to do more. Maybe we need to have some fiscal policy now that's mixed in with all this monetary policy, but it's got to be, we got to have smarter people in government. We've got to educate people. We got to, look, it's all these stupid people without education, without degrees that are voting for Donald Trump. But the whole idea that government can fix things, the notion that we don't have to live within the confines of physics that are governed within the confines of 4 dimensions of time and space, that somehow governments can overcome the natural laws of economics, and the notion that supply and demand doesn't matter, that the notion that resources are unlimited, the notion that people we don't have to save, we can spend we can deficit spend our way to prosperity and print money to prosperity. So, I mean, we're talking about PhDs in economics that come out with these concepts and beliefs, and they're winning Nobel Prizes on those falsehoods. And so that's the narrative that we get constantly in the mainstream media, and it doesn't make sense to most people. But we're all told, well, you haven't gone to Harvard, Princeton, Yale. You don't have a PhD in economics, so just shut up. Go away. And so people say, all right, okay, and and they watch television, and they and they spend their time wastefully in whatever sort of pleasures of the moment that suits them. And so we are told that it doesn't matter. And how many decades do we have to go through this same policy mix to learn that it doesn't work? The 1930s. We're just doing it more so now than we did in the 1930s. Deficit spending, printing money, easy money, and so on and so forth. And, Bernanke promised us this time around, he promised Milton Friedman that we won't let it happen this time. By gosh, this time we're going to really get out in front of it. And we're going to give it everything we've got, and we're not going to let the depression take hold. Well, it is taking hold. We're not getting out of the hole that we were in 2008, 2009. The number of employed adults continues to decrease. The number of people on food stamps continues to rise. And it's easy for me to to explain it, I think anybody that has the framework of Austrian economics, the notion that you can create capital out of thin air. How did we recapitalize the banks after 2008, 2009? Well, we did it a couple of ways. One, they created money out of nothing and gave it to them. Secondly, they cheated the savers by redistributing wealth from those that saved their money and pushed it into the banks and recapitalized the banks that way. Meantime, though, what's happened is with all this malinvestment, you have, you're not pricing capital essentially by manipulating interest rates at lower and lower levels. You're not rewarding capital, you're not pricing it. You're not allowing the price mechanism to determine how much money is saved and how much is invested, and you're not allowing it to be invested in the most efficient places. So you have all this wastefulness. I mean, you only have to go back to the .com and telecom debacle of 2000. Then the housing debacle of 2007, 2008, and now I think we have a sovereign debt debacle that probably will end up bringing the whole system down. But it is true though, Donegan, that if everybody believed as I do and saw the handwriting on the wall, there would be one heck of a decline immediately. And so I can understand on the one hand why the policymakers want to continue to perpetuate the big lie that we can spend our way to prosperity. But on the other hand, the longer they do that, of course, the more extreme the more extreme will be the ultimate demise and the correction when it comes.
So what can the individual person who's a thinking person and wants to make choices and actions based on reality and not on this sort of collective delusion or collective dream that's keeping the bubble inflated or keeping the merry-go-round going, what are some specific actions that an ordinary person can do if they want to take responsibility and work from real truth and from real information?
Yeah, well, the first thing, of course, is and I suppose, we're preaching to the choir when we talk on shows like yours and mine. And so the real problem is getting people who don't want to face up to these realities, but assuming that you do look at the objective truth of what's going on in the economy. And I would say it could be extended to all areas, many different areas of our lives, socially, the way we treat each other, and so on and so forth. But
yeah, let's look at each of those. Yeah.
I just think that we're seeing a presidential campaign, and it seems like each one of these get worse. But this idea of not being able to accept other people's ideas is something that I think is really very problematic, and I think it stems from a loss of moral fiber, a loss of a belief in a higher being, in a creator, as our founding fathers definitely believed. And I would say that goes a long ways in explaining why we have relinquished our freedom and handed it over to government. If we don't believe that we are connected with a creator, then where do we go for our help, for the answers in life? We go to a government figure, and the more and bigger problems we have, the more sort of tyrannical government leaders we turn to. And history is full of examples of that. So what I think what we have to do is if you can come to grips with, well, I mean, again, my belief is that there is a creator. I think what's happened is we have been taught, Edward Bernays and the manipulators have been taught to convince us that there is no God, there is no creator, and that has been achieved largely through evolutionary lies. I mean, it's been very easy to take the notion that microevolution, therefore macroevolution. So we know that species adapt within their species, but there's no evidence for cross speciation or macroevolution. And yet, the notion that because there is micro, therefore there is macro, therefore we all came from apes and it was all an accident and there was no transcendent intelligent being that started this game, that started the Big Bang in the universe, then I think that once you've gotten past that notion that there is a transcendent being, there is a creator, then you set yourselves up for humanistic answers to things. And our founding fathers believed in a transcendent being, clearly, when they, with the Declaration of Independence, when they made that statement that we are endowed by our Creator, capital C, with certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And with that understanding of a transcendent being and natural laws, then you say, okay, we're going to submit ourselves to those natural laws, whether it's economics or physics or whatever. We don't have the right to manipulate those laws. Those laws have been given to us by somebody that's much smarter than we are, somebody that created the Big Bang and caused this universe to be created, and individuals to be created with an intent and with a purpose in mind. And if you believe that, or if you don't believe that, it's a sort of basic worldview that makes all the difference in the world. And where I think our country has gone in the Western world, because this was a Judeo-Christian concept, that once you've gotten rid of that, you've set the stage for a dictatorship, for a loss of freedom and a loss of liberty. And so the natural laws Adam Smith talked about, the invisible hand, the natural laws of economics. And I think to a great extent he's absolutely right. Ayn Rand would agree with that, and she wouldn't agree with the transcendent being. So you don't have to be, a believer as I am to sort of see how the natural laws work. But nonetheless, we've gotten away from that. So what I think, all of us are going to live, the psalmist says we live 70 years, and if we're strong, 80 or so. My mother's 93 now, struggling, but she's 93. And so I think we all have to come to grips sooner or later. Donegan, I'm a lot older than you. I will be 70 next time I make a complete trip around the sun. And so you start to realize that, hey, this isn't going to last forever. And maybe there is something beyond this world. And, so I think that's one thing that people should be asking, but I think they've succeeded in getting us not to ask those most basic questions. Where did we come from? Why are we here? And where are we going? Well, okay, if those don't matter to you, then it's all about the pleasures of the moment. What can I get from everybody else rather than what can I give to other people, which comes from the other sort of worldview. And I think that's where we're going. So this notion that we are all entitled to get what we want when we want it, and if we don't, and if we need to cheat, lie, steal, kill, whatever, to do it, and if we can get away with it, then we can do it. And I think if you have that mindset, then I think your society's in big trouble. But what can we do then as individuals? I'm just talking spiritually. What I think I need to do is to have a sense of where I'm at with regard to the transcendent being. But beyond that, on a completely practical basis, then I think the things we've talked about before, if you believe that we could be heading for some extreme social unrest and other issues, or whether it's just natural phenomena that come along. We had a horrible hurricane here in New York a few years ago, and so to be ready with food and water and electricity or backup systems and things like that. Or what if the power grid is taken down and you can't get money out of your ATM machines? You need to have something to barter with. Well, nothing better to barter with, I would say, ever in the history of man, and probably ever in the future, especially if the electronic system's taken down. How are you going to be able to transfer money digitally then? So I would say that, sort of the basics in life, food, water, preparation, which you're a reluctant prepper. We would rather not have to deal with this stuff. But I think if you really want to face reality, then everybody, whether you want to or not, must at some point, then I think you have to look at those practical things about how to protect yourself and your family. I'm not a big believer in weaponry. I don't own anything. I live in New York City. It's next to impossible to get a gun, I suppose. But if you feel the need for that, then you should do that. And but that's besides that, I don't know what else to offer.
In the area of economics, you've described the unnatural and basically unlawful, if you talk about natural law, unlawful direction that we've lurched into, trying to defy gravity through deading our way to prosperity. So what specific steps can an individual and a family take that are counter to that are based on the truth?
Yeah, I mean, example would be what people probably don't understand is that when they own a brokerage account, they think they own the stock, the shares of stock that's in their account. They actually don't. They're lending it to the brokerage firm. So one thing you could do is take those shares out, take the shares, demand the shares, and keep them in possession. Now, it's very inconvenient to do that, because if you want to sell them, it's just a lot of time and expense and effort to get them back into street names so you can sell them. But nonetheless, that would be one thing you could do. And other people don't realize and understand that when they deposit money in the bank, it's not their money. It's the bank's money. You've lent the bank the money, which then they lend out multiple times to, 10, 20, however many times. Reserve requirements are next to nothing, so it could be infinite numbers of times. So you think that that's your money? Well, banks start to go down, lots of luck. And, so I would say take the money out as much as you can. You have to keep money in the bank so you can pay your bills and so forth. But stash cash, that would be another thing to do. Or take that cash and buy gold with it, small denominations, gold and silver coins and so forth, so that if you need to use them for barter, or you can always turn them back in. There's a gold money, which I have used and continue to use. There's BitGold, which is a way of getting your wealth outside of the system. Get it outside of the banking system. I think we're going to zero. I mean, the progression is low interest rates, so take your money and spend it. But that hasn't really stimulated the economy to any extent. So now they're going to go negative rates. They're already doing it. I forget, there's something like 35 or 40% of the global debt market is negative, which is just insane. So if the banks go negative, people are going to say, well, or if they start bail-ins or negative interest rates, people are going to say, well, why should I keep money in the bank? You pull it out. So then the next thing they're going to do is, and they're talking about it, is making cash illegal. Well, what are you going to do? These are tyrannical, criminal acts by government. I guess you just do what you can do and take the money out, stash the cash, buy gold, buy silver. If you have a lot of money, buy real property, something that is going to be useful. Learn how to do things so that you can, learn how to be useful so that you can provide services if the system goes down to other people in need. Those are some of the ideas that I have.
Of those ideas, now you mentioned that yourself, and you mentioned this the last time we spoke with you, that you live in a urban area and so on. What is your thought about Plan B if there's a societal collapse, if there's a financial collapse, any kind of thing like that? What are your thinking for people who don't live out in acreage where they really have those self-sustaining food supply and that sort of thing? What are at least some options, some steps, some preparations that people can make, even in an urban setting?
I would say learn to know your neighbors, learn to care for your neighbors, have some skills that you can share and trade with your neighbors. But I really think that's the most important thing. And because I think when times get really difficult, I live in Queens, and we have pretty much, it's still pretty much a European segment, although it's changing, sector of town here. So people basically have a lot in common in terms of their values and so forth. But I think you need to get along with people and help each other and have skills to help each other and have backup systems as much as possible. I mean, there's no way that we can really. It was a professor of mine many years ago that used to joke about it. He says, you only come this way once, and if you do it upright, once is enough. Was the way his sort of reckless way of just going for it and just living and realizing you're going to die one day. And another and he would say, well, there's not one of us going to get out of here alive. And ultimately that's true. So, but at the same time, while we're given the gift of life, we want to share it as much as we can with others. I really honestly believe that being willing and able to share the gifts that you have, whether they're financial, skill sets that you have, that you're going to be in better shape by being willing and able to work as a community with each other, starting with your own family, and then branching out down the street, down the block. Know your neighbors and work with them as much as possible.
Well, Jay, if there's people who have heard you for the first time here and really would like to follow up and learn more about what you do and all the voices, you speak with a number. I mean, every week you've got several guests on your program, so it's in a 1 month period of time they're going to hear a lot of different voices.
Right.
Where can people join you and find out more about what you're doing?
The best place to go to is jtaylormedia.com, jaytaylormedia.com. My weekly radio show is there, and we do post things frequently, podcasts as well as articles that I write and other people write. So, yeah, there's a lot of alternative ideas there, that's for sure. If you don't want to be uncomfortable and you don't want to learn to know things that maybe the mainstream would rather you not know, then just keep watching CNBC and NBC and all those guys. If you want to know, if you want to think about the world as at least a different view of the world, then yeah, I'd encourage you to come to jtaylormedia.com. And also to listen to your programs as well, obviously.
Now, you also mentioned shadowstats.com. Actually, you mentioned John Williams and his work at shadowstats.com. Right. Are there any other specific sources that you would direct people to besides your channel and Shadowstats, where they could also, you think, are just gold mines of truth and information that people would get that's a strong contrast to what the swill is that they're going to find on the corporate media?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, check out the work that Ron Paul does and Daniel McAdams, the Ron Paul Institute, or I guess it's the other piece. I can't think of the name of the website right now. But Ron and Daniel do almost a daily podcast or television show that's available there. People should check him out. I've been talking a lot to William Engdahl, Engdhal. I mentioned a few moments ago William Engdahl, a historian. I would highly recommend a book called The Gods of Money that he wrote for some real insights into the powers behind the American throne, who and how almost from the start of the revolution in 1776, how the powers at the Bank of England were reaching in with their tentacles throughout our history, probably had something to do with the death of President Lincoln, very possibly something to do with the death of John Kennedy. Very well documented work in terms of what went on. The notion that the whole gold issue, and Lincoln wanted to go with the silver, but that didn't, you had William Jennings Bryan after that, and there was that whole cross of gold. Well, the boys in London and New York had the gold, and they didn't want any competition from silver. So Engdahl makes a very good case that both Lincoln and then later Kennedy may have been taken out because they were really very much in favor of the constitutional requirement that Congress, not a private central bank, be in charge of our monetary system. And so, if you want some provocative ideas, William Engdahl is another good place to go. The Lost Hegemon is his most recent book, and he's talking there about how the Petro-Dollar is coming unglued, how American hegemony days are numbered, and how we are headed for some very grave conflicts likely between with Russia and China on the one hand against the Anglo-American Empire. So those are some ideas, many more. And if you listen to my show, I interview authors from all manner of contradictory ideas. So I would welcome all of your listeners to come and listen to my shows.
And in addition to hearing your broadcasts, they can also sign up for an email trigger that'll help them understand what the guests are, what the topics are could be that are coming up?
Yes, they most certainly can. Just send an email to ttaylor@miningstocks.com. ttaylor@miningstocks.com, and request to be put on our email list.
Well, Jay, once again, thanks for joining us here on Reluctant Preppers, and always glad to have you here, and grateful for the work that you do and the voice that you bring to otherwise what would be a barren landscape. We need independent voices such as yours, bringing out a true diversity of ideas to really help people see what's going on and help them figure it out. So just appreciate you joining us here.
Well, thank you very much, Donegan, and the same for you and all of the other guests that you have, because I know that your goals and mine are very much in sync.
Well, thanks again. We'll have you back when we can. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you.